Okay, this is the reason I even started looking at the front end, the tie rods. I walked up behind it. I was cleaning up the other day after a ride, and I walked up behind it. I noticed my toe on one wheel was really bad. So if you notice on the right hand side, everything's pretty well straight. Now when I walked up behind it, I noticed that the left hand side was towed in really bad. Here's a shot of it from the front, and I realized that you set them up with a little bit of toe in, but like you can see there, that tire is running pretty much true to where you would think that it should run. And this tire is, man, it's towed in a lot. So when I went to actually pull the boot off and look at it, here's the inner tie rod. I guess it's a ball joint where it ties on, where it screws into the steering rack. And this is all the slop that I've got in it. And so that's quite a bit. Compared it to the other side, and the other side's, it's tight as can be. Got the tire removed, and I've already pulled the inner boot off the tie rod. So all it is just a little plastic clip. You'll figure it out, and a tie wrap. You cut it, just slide it off out of the way. The next thing I'm going to do is first I'm going to mark the original tie rod, just so I can get my distance the same on the new one, and then unscrew it from the steering rack, and then we'll put the new one back in. I'm going to use a black Sharpie just to mark the threads on the original rod. The jam nut on the outer tie rod end is a 22 millimeter. It's actually a 22 millimeter on the nut and a 22 millimeter on the actual tie rod. I only had one 22 millimeter, so I'm just using an adjustable wrench. So break that loose. Then the inner tie rod, where it connects to the steering rack, is actually a 32 millimeter, and I picked up a crow's foot. It's at a funky angle. And it should just unscrew. Once you get that, you can unscrew the inner tie rod from the outer tie rod. Then you'll have to, so then you'll run this nut off, slide the boot off, transfer your Sharpie mark from the old tie rod to the new tie rod, and then put the boot back on with a plastic clip, and then we'll be ready to actually reinstall the new inner tie rod. Alright, it is now 2 weeks later, and I actually have the right parts now. When I pulled the tie rod out last time, pulled the new one out of the box. This is what I got. This is what I should have. So they sent me a trail tie rod for a 50-inch machine as opposed to a sport for a 60-inch machine. But got the right stuff now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer the mark from this tie rod to this tie rod, so I'll have the length the same, and then we'll put it back in. Okay, I got the new tie rod reassembled, all the parts on it. The boot's back on. It goes on first. Then there's this little snap ring, plastic ring that tightens down the boot. That goes on next. And then the jam nut goes on. And I've also transferred my mark from the old tie rod to the new tie rod. One thing Arctic Cat calls for in the manual is to apply a red thread locker, which I believe is 271, to this end of the tie rod. I'm going to put blue on, which is 242. Because when I break this out in the field, I want to be able to actually get it off. And of course, in typical Arctic Cat fashion, there was no thread locker on it when I took it off. So for some reason, they want us to put it on but they don't put it on when they build the thing in the factory. Okay. The inner tie rod to the steering rack. The book calls for 37 foot-pounds. One thing the manual referenced, and I had no idea about this, and I'll just go with it because it's in the book. The crow's foot needs to be at a 90-degree angle or a right angle, I think is what it says, to the torque wrench. So I've got this going this way. I got the torque wrench like this. I got it set to 37 foot-pounds, so we're going to assume that it's good. And like I said, I put blue Loctite on there as opposed to the red Loctite it calls for, just so I can get it off whenever I break it in the future. Another thing that I noticed when I was putting this back together, I did not notice the other day when I was taking it apart, is I actually have a crack in my my steering rack right here. This is the same side that I broke an axle on. Tie rod's ruined, and now I got a steering rack that's cracked on this side, so I'm assuming I did it probably all at the same time. I just hadn't noticed it before. So this will be, I guess we'll find out if Arctic Cat warranty is any good. If the part's not too expensive, I'll just buy it and put it on because it's not worth the hassle. If it ends up being an expensive part, then I'll play the game and see if I can get Arctic Cat to pay for it. Now it's time to run the inner tie rod into the outer tie rod. I'm putting this back together not exactly the same way I took it apart. When I took it apart, I pulled the tie rod loose from the steering rack and then just ran the tie rod out of the end of the tie rod in, and that worked out good. But putting it back together, the ball joint up here where it goes to the tie rack the steering rack is a lot tighter. Couldn't get it to actually articulate and get the threads to line up and all that, so run the tie rod into the steering rack, 15 millimeter wrench, and you can actually just thread it into the tie rod in. And it's going to be a little bit of a slow process, but I'll run this in to where the mark that I transferred lines up, and then I'll jam it down. Okay, the tie rod is run in all the way. A couple of 22 millimeter wrenches, or one, and an adjustable wrench. And we'll tighten up the jam nut. The book actually has a torque spec here of 25 foot-pounds. Yeah, I'm just going to go with tight. It's just a jam nut, you know. Next thing is to run the bellows back up and cover up the steering rack, and the bottom clip, the little snap clip goes on the bottom. The bigger end around the steering rack is a tie wrap, and you're finished. Put it all back together. Of course, you know, probably want to, I mean, if you really are super anal about it, the measurement ought to get me really close as far as my steering alignment being good. You can also, you know, of course, check that. But as far as a trail side fix, the Sharpie will get you close enough to get you off the trail.